So one of the things you need to understand in Albion is the enchant system. So if you run across a kind of in the open world and you see a resource, whether it's a tree, a mammoth, or not mammoth, like any hide animal, a rock, etc., that's glowing, that is tiered. So it usually glows either green, blue, or very rarely pink/purple. That is enchanted. And when people say 0.1, 0.2, and 0.3, that's what they're talking about. So 4.1, for example, that has the green enchant, so you'll see an item that has that green kind of border around it. It is equivalent to 1 tier higher. So a 4.1 has an item power of about 800, and then a flat 5 has also about an 800. So a 4.1 is equivalent to a 5, and a 5.1 has about a 900 and it's equivalent to a tier 6. Same thing with 6.1 equivalent to tier 7, and if you had a 7.1, it will be equivalent to tier 8. Now, as you go up in tiers, it obviously increases. For example, a 4.2 will have about 1,000 item power, which is about equivalent to a tier 6, right? And a 4.3 will have about 1,100 item power, which is about equivalent to a tier 7. In addition to that, there's the quality. The quality adds just a bit of item power. It really is not that much. I mean, in all intents and purposes, anything under excellent is pretty much meaningless for majority of the people. Excellent and higher is really what it's about. Excellent adds, I believe, plus 50 item power. So my regular claws have 1077. My excellent one has about 1117, which is about a 50-point difference, I believe. And then finally, Masterpiece is the highest quality, and this adds a whole new tier. So we talked about, 6.1s being equivalent to 7, but if you look at this, it's 1285, and my tier 7 one only has 1195. It's almost, it is pretty much a 1 tier difference. So you really want to use this knowledge to your advantage. For example, flat tier 4 is like about 4k for this particular jacket, right? But if you go to a tier 5, it's about 7k for it, right? But if you go for a 4.1, it's only 6,500, right? So if you're, if you're kind of in a budget and you still want to have that item power, instead of going for tier 5, which is, look, let me drop this down, 7k, you can go for the 4.1, same item power, same everything, and get for much cheaper. Another thing to keep in mind, speaking of the auction house, is to essentially use the quality in your favor. So for example, 4.1 Masterpiece, which is what you can find. Remember, Masterpiece, this is equivalent to a tier 6, 0.1 being tier 5, Masterpiece adding another one, so tier 6. So if you can only use tier 4 or tier 5, and you want to hit like a tier 6 character, you can start using 4.1 Masterpiece. Like, so 4.1 Masterpiece, 18,900. But if you were to go to the tier 6 one and go normal, it's 18,000. So you're for essentially for being a low B character with a 900 silver difference, which is absolutely nothing, you're going to be able to afford tier 6, right? Even if you're not famed up enough. Another thing to keep in mind is, as you join, you probably get invited to a guild that has like a guild island with like essentially workstations around it. You gotta figure out what your profit margins are, and it's really hard to say for each person's. I'm gonna say it's different. But one of the things to keep in mind is any island, any workstation in the island, do not get a resource return rate. So for example, if I go to this windmill maker right here, the journeyman's mill tier 3, and I try to convert my wheat into flour, you see this resource return rate, it's 0. However, in the cities, the resource return rate is about 15%. This goes to all the cities, so Carleon, outside in Fort Sterling, all those other cities, you have a little bit of higher resource return rate. And then finally, the cities in the black zone, town plots in the black zone rather, if you're lucky enough to get invited to a guild that has one of those resource return rate is about, I believe, 25% or 20%, so slightly higher, but you also run the risk of getting ganked out there. So most people, I would highly recommend refining in the city, or at least crafting in the city. If you can find some stations that are cheap, you're probably gonna find a lot of cheap stations in the outer edges here. Let's see, let's go look at Fort Sterling. Yeah, it's not too bad. Usage fee of 20%. I like to use things that are under 20% because that's kind of what I like, but you know, it's really dependent on you and how much time you have. So definitely highly recommend using that resource return rate for you know, to get some of your resources back. Speaking of crafting, one thing I forgot to mention is use your focus. If you get premium, you're gonna get 3,000 focus and about, what is it, 10,000 a day. What focus does is increases your resource return rate by 30%. So essentially, once I use this, I go to almost 45% resource return rate. So that means if I don't think I can use it on this one. Okay. If I use resource return, I'm gonna get pretty much half of my resources back, give or take. And it's a rolling dice. It's not necessarily. Sometimes you actually end up getting a little bit more than half if the luck is in your favor. So yeah, I would highly recommend using your focus if you're concentrating on crafting.